I want access to Daniel's money. Now. She didn't cry when she said it. Not really. 3 days after we buried my son, my daughter-in-law sat across from me in his lawyer's office and spoke like grief had already turned into entitlement. She believed everything belonged to her. She believed she had already won. What she didn't know, what she was completely unaware of, was that Daniel had trusted only one person to control the $300 million he left behind. Me. My name is Ruth Hale. I'm 67 years old, a retired librarian, and a mother who had just buried her only son, or so I thought. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from and what time it is. I read every comment. Because this isn't just a story about inheritance, it's about truth. And how sometimes the truth doesn't just change everything, it rewrites your entire family. Now let me tell you how everything actually began. Daniel didn't inherit wealth, he built something from nothing. And I was there for every fragile step of it. I remember the early days when success wasn't even a possibility, just survival. He worked out of a cramped apartment with peeling paint, sleeping on a couch that barely held together, chasing an idea most people didn't understand. While others saw risk, I saw something else: focus, discipline, and a quiet determination that never needed validation. There were nights he called me just to hear a familiar voice because everything felt like it was collapsing. And I would sit there, listening, reminding him why he started. Over time, the world caught up to what I had always known. Investors came, contracts followed. And then one day, the number attached to his name became something unreal, hundreds of millions. But Daniel never changed. He still came home every Sunday, still brought dessert, still asked my opinion like I was part of a world I didn't belong to. That was who he was: grounded, careful, intentional about the people he trusted. Which is why when he introduced Claire, I tried to trust her too. She was everything. Daniel wasn't polished, confident, effortlessly social. The kind of woman who didn't just enter a room. She took control of it without trying. She knew how to speak, how to listen, how to make people feel seen. And yet, beneath all of that, there was something else. Something precise. She didn't just experience life, she assessed it. Conversations felt measured. Questions had direction. She noticed details most people ignored, especially when it came to money, structure, and control. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just a mother struggling to accept change. But instincts don't disappear, they wait. And over time, I started noticing the small shifts in Daniel too. Subtle, but real. A hesitation in his voice. A pause before answering certain questions. The way he began thinking more carefully about decisions that used to come naturally to him. It wasn't conflict. Not yet. It was something quieter. Something building beneath the surface. And the night he looked at me and said, "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, promise you'll protect what I built." I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. He wasn't just talking about the future. He was preparing for something he already felt coming. Body, paragraph 2, is approximately equal to 450 to hybrid dark plus emotional. Hong Sung Zhang. Daniel's death came without warning. The kind of sudden ending that leaves no space for preparation and no time for denial. One call in the middle of the night. A voice too calm to be delivering something so final. And just like that, Everything I had built my life around disappeared. The days that followed didn't feel real. People came and went, offering condolences that blurred together into something distant and repetitive. While I stood in the center of it all, trying to understand how a life so full could end so abruptly, Claire cried when she needed to. She held people, thanked them, played the part of a grieving widow in a way that no one could question. And maybe part of it was real. But grief doesn't move with direction. And that was the first thing I noticed. While I was still struggling to process the loss, she was already moving forward. Quiet conversations with lawyers, questions about access to accounts, mentions of documents that hadn't even been discussed yet. At first, I told myself she was trying to stay strong, that people handle loss differently. But there's a difference between coping and advancing. 3 days after the funeral, we sat in Daniel's attorney's office. And that was where everything began to shift into something I couldn't ignore. The trust was revealed, $300 million. Structured, protected, designed with layers of control that reflected exactly who Daniel was. Careful, intentionnel, unwilling to leave anything to chance. And then came the detail that changed everything. Control of the trust had been placed in my hands, not hers, mine. The silence in that room felt heavy, like something had just been said that couldn't be undone. Claire didn't react emotionally. She didn't argue. She adjusted, asked questions about structure, about authority, about how decisions would be made moving forward. Her voice was steady, but her focus had shifted completely. It wasn't about Daniel anymore. It was about control. And then she said something that stayed with me long after we left that office. That's a lot of responsibility for one person. Not a compliment, not concern, an evaluation. And that was the moment I understood something clearly. She hadn't lost her place in Daniel's life. She was trying to secure her place in everything he left behind. When Claire said she was pregnant, the room didn't just go quiet, it shifted. Because suddenly, everything had a direction, a future, a claim that couldn't be questioned without consequence. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The idea that a part of Daniel still existed, that something of him had survived, the sudden, brutal finality of his death, it was the only thing that made the silence feel less absolute. But belief doesn't erase instinct, and mine had already begun to speak. The timing didn't align. The way she said it measured, controlled, almost perfectly placed, felt less like a confession and more like a move. And once that thought entered my mind, I couldn't ignore it. So I didn't confront her. I didn't question her publicly. I did what I had done my entire life when something didn't feel right, I observed. Quietly, carefully. And what I found began to form a pattern I couldn't deny. There were gaps in her timeline, conversations she had before Daniel died that no longer made sense in the context she presented. And eventually, there was another name, another man. Not recent, not obvious, but present enough to raise a question I couldn't ignore. Was the child really Daniel's? Months passed, and the story solidified around her. Family, friends, even Daniel's colleagues began speaking about the baby as his legacy, his heir, the continuation of everything he had built. And through all of it, Claire never wavered, never hesitated, which is what made it even more dangerous. Because confidence, when it's built on something untrue, doesn't disappear, it expands. until reality forces it to stop. And that moment came when the child was born. Because belief is one thing, but DNA doesn't adjust itself to fit a story. The DNA results didn't come with emotion. No hesitation. No interpretation. Just numbers. Percentages. And a truth that didn't need explanation. Daniel was not the father. 0%. Final. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was collapse. The entire narrative Claire had built, the grieving widow, the unborn heir, the rightful claim to everything Daniel left behind, fell apart in a single moment. She denied it immediately. Of course. Said the test was wrong. Demanded another. Accused me of manipulating the process. But truth doesn't weaken under pressure. It holds. The second test confirmed the first, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because the final report included something none of us expected. A genetic match. Not to Daniel, but to my family line. Close enough to eliminate coincidence. Precise enough to demand an explanation. That was when Claire finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. The kind of quiet that comes when there's nothing left to protect. Years ago, before Daniel, she had been with Andrew, my first son. The one I had lost long before this. They had tried to have a child together. Fertility treatments. Samples stored. A part of the past that was never fully erased. And months before Daniel died, she went back. Alone. What she believed wouldn't work, did. She became pregnant with Andrew's child. And she never told Daniel. Not when she found out. Not when she married him. Not even when she sat in that lawyer's office claiming everything he built as if it belonged to her future. Sitting there, holding that report, I felt something I couldn't name at first. Not anger. Not relief. Something deeper. Because in a way I never could have imagined, I hadn't just lost my sons. One of them had come back. Not through memory. Not through legacy. But through blood. And suddenly, the $300 million wasn't the center of the story anymore. The truth was, in the end, there was no victory. No revenge. Just a decision. The money stayed in the trust protected, structured, controlled exactly the way Daniel intended. But part of it was set aside for the child. Not because of Claire, but because of Andrew. Because money reveals who people really are. But loss reveals what actually matters. I didn't forgive her completely. Some things don't disappear that easily. But I didn't destroy her either. Because the child she carried wasn't a mistake. He was family. And family isn't always simple. Truth has a way of revealing itself. Always. So tell me if you were in my position. Would you have done the same thing? If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is protect the truth, even when it changes everything.